Hi everyone, I am back. I took last week off. I was enjoying time with my family. I figured you guys probably were too. And I didn't want to get anything political or anything too deep that day. It was the day before Thanksgiving, so I thought, yeah, let's just have fun. And we're going to talk about Thanksgiving today. I know I'm late, but better late than never. And you can talk about this next year with your kids, or it might still be, we're kind of still in that season. You can talk about what we're going to talk about with your kids today. But this is really important because we talked about this before, this false history. If you're new to the group, by the way, my name is Britton Latulip. I'm the author of the Art of Raising Children for Greatness series and the president of Blue Manners Online Academy. But in Revealing School, the purpose of that was to get your kids out of the public school system and to show you everything that's wrong with the public school system. It's the largest book I've written. I think it's 470 pages. And in this, I talk about history or socialist fables, and I just give some examples of just totally false history that they teach in the schools. Now, the leftists in this country are doing the same thing. They're claiming that you also learned false history, and they're telling you, they're debunking history, debunking all of these stories, and they're giving you another version of history, the true version of history. The problem is it's the latest version of their false history. Like they wrote the false history in the public school system, and now they're writing new versions, and it gets worse and worse each time. So I really want to talk about the Pilgrims today. They're not perfect people, and actually in Revealing School, I actually talk about this very thing, Thanksgiving, because a few years ago, actually, it's been many years ago. It's probably been 10 years ago or something. I was an education director at a church down by Boise. For those you don't know, Idaho. By Boise, and we were talking about Thanksgiving, and I was going to talk about how it's a celebration of God and Thanksgiving and prayer to God. And so when the kids came in, I just wanted to just kind of see what their thoughts were on Thanksgiving, and I started just kind of taking a poll, asking a few kids what they thought about Thanksgiving. And pretty much every single one of them, and some of them were young kids, some of them were older kids. I think, we had some middle schoolers in there. Every single one of them said it is a celebration to thank the Indians for saving the Pilgrims. And the Pilgrims had a really rough time, and the Indians taught them how to plant corn and kind of took care of them, taught them how to hunt and all that sort of stuff. So every single one of them thought that that's what the Thanksgiving celebration was about. And that's important because that was one of the versions, one of the socialist fables that was perpetuated. The latest one is that it's really a day of genocide. That's the latest version. And then, of course, we have the truth. And the truth is interesting. So there's three things, okay? When we talk about Thanksgiving, there's three things your kids need to know. The first one is that it's a federal holiday. And the federal holiday has actually nothing to do with the Pilgrims and Indians. Nothing to do with the Pilgrims and Indians. The second thing is that it is a religious celebration. So before the Pilgrims came over, there were already Christian denominations celebrating Thanksgiving. Back in the Netherlands, even in the New World. So the Pilgrims weren't the first ones to celebrate Thanksgiving in the New World. It was just a normal religious celebration. And then the final thing is the historical event, the thing that we've kind of associated with Thanksgiving, the Pilgrims and the Indians. I want to just briefly talk about that. So the first one is that when you celebrate the federal holiday, so last week when you ate your turkey dinner and you're with your family and it's the day of Thanksgiving, that federal holiday has one thing, one purpose. According to the federal holiday, it was declared first by Washington. So George Washington believed that we needed a day. This is after the American Revolution. So George Washington is the president. He wants a day of prayer and thanksgiving to God for providence. Doesn't say anything about the Indians. It's just recognizing that there's this we owe our all that we have to God, a day of thanksgiving. So that was the first one. But he only did it for one day. It was just one day, 1 year. There were a lot of people who didn't want to celebrate it every year because they thought it might be not a separation of church and state, and it might become a religious holiday. You fast forward to Abraham Lincoln. In the middle of the Civil War, he's having a really tough time, and he gets this idea that it would really bring the country together to have this official holiday of Thanksgiving. And so if you read the Lincoln Proclamation of Thanksgiving, and again, it's all about God and God's providence and God's blessing. It doesn't mention the Pilgrims or the Indians because it has nothing to do with that. And finally, you get to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He also has a Thanksgiving proclamation. He changes the date. And if you read the short proclamation, it doesn't mention the Pilgrims and the Indians. It has everything to do with God, kind of. He's a weird guy. I'm not a huge fan of him, but he kind of mentions God. He talks about, the spiritual beings and the author in heaven, and I think he even does say God. So in all three proclamations of the federal holiday that we celebrate, it's just about thanking God. It's a day of prayer and thanksgiving to God. It has nothing to do with the Pilgrims and the Indians. Okay, that's one. So how did it become about the Pilgrims and the Indians? Okay, well, we're going to get there in just a second. The second thing is it's a religious holiday. As I said, the Pilgrims are a certain brand of Protestantism, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. And they celebrate this religious holiday for a certain reason. And it's a traditional Jewish holiday. It goes back, I think it's the Feast of the Tabernacles is what they think it is. They have another name for it, I forget. And it was a common feast, and the Pilgrims are going to celebrate that. They don't celebrate Christmas, they don't celebrate Easter, but they celebrate Thanksgiving. There were many other colonies that celebrated Thanksgiving in the New World, and then back in the Netherlands. So it is a religious, even back then, it was a religious holiday of thanksgiving to God. It had nothing to do with thanking the Indians. So where did kids get the idea that it was about thanking the Indians? Well, it all comes down to these narratives, these leftist narratives, how they have your children in the public school system, they can teach them anything. And so they teach them history, not to know what really happened, but as a way to impact their worldview at the time, for progress, let's say. So the first narrative was that way back when we were trying to get religious tolerance in this country, we wanted to start opening up the country to other religions, not just different sects of Christianity, but we just wanted a blanket. You can practice any religion you want in this country, total religious freedom. You can even be a Satanist. They started pushing this idea that that's really what the founders, the Pilgrims, and they weren't the founders, but they did come here early. But that's really what the Pilgrims came here for. They came to America for religious freedom. And you've probably heard that. That was like the first generation narrative. It was all about religious freedom. And that's so important in our society. And we'll have these religions that come over to our country. Maybe they're hostile. But we say, hey, we are founded on the principles of religious tolerance. That is also not historically accurate. It is true that the Pilgrims were escaping persecution, kind of. So first they fled England to escape King James's persecution of the Puritans, and they went to the Netherlands. And the Netherlands is like the first capitalist, secular republic society. So they get over there. It's a haven for religious freedom, but they find the culture is very degenerate, very materialistic, and they don't want their kids brought up in that. So then they come to the New World. So in a sense, they were looking for religious freedom for themselves, but they certainly didn't believe in religious freedom. They believed that there was one faith and that there was one truth and one gospel. And they actually persecuted a lot of other brands of Christianity. They were hostile towards Catholics and Baptists and the Quakers. I don't know why. I think there was a lot of Quakers that settled close by, but they really couldn't stand the Quakers. This is not the Pilgrims, by the way. It's their descendants, okay? It's the Puritans, okay? They're all Puritans. I'm not talking about the original Pilgrims that came over and then, I think there's 120 of them, okay? So they actually, that was the first myth that was perpetuated, that the Pilgrims came over here, really was about religious freedom, and that's what this society, America, was built on, okay? So they got that. The next one was multiculturalism. And that's where you get the Indians. So then they started teaching these kids, they were trying to promote this idea of multiculturalism. Not multiracialism, okay? It's a little bit different. It's multiculturalism. It's this idea that you can take all of these different cultures with all of these different beliefs and you can form a society, a peaceful society. And they said that's what this country was really founded on. And they used the Thanksgiving feast between the Pilgrims and the Indians to say that's what it's about. So you have these two different people and they weren't trying to convert each other. They just came together in this kind of brotherhood and embraced each other and had this celebration together. And it was just a secular celebration, and actually it was about the Pilgrims giving thanks to the Indians like Squanto who saved them and taught them how to plant corn and taught them how to hunt. And so really it was a celebration of multiculturalism, and that's what all the kids were learning. That was the last wave, okay? That was 10 years ago, and that was actually when I was a kid. It was all about the Pilgrims just thanking the Indians and kind of this kumbaya multiculturalism, which that's fine, but that's not what Thanksgiving was about, even to the Pilgrims then. That is a myth that they were perpetuating, and that's what they always do. The social leftists, the communists, the capitalists, they always inject their own narrative that suits the times, okay? So they got religious freedom. They didn't need that anymore. They kind of pushed that aside. Now they get multiculturalism. They don't need that anymore. Everybody accepts multiculturalism. That is a hallmark of America today. They're setting that aside. Now we're in the next phase of the history. Now today, the Thanksgiving dinner is about genocide and oppression and white supremacy is the new narrative, which is how they're rewriting all of history. And if it's true, that's fine. We'll teach that. But it's not true. So This narrative comes from a guy, Howard Zinn. Hopefully you remember Howard Zinn. Howard Zinn, we already talked about with Christopher Columbus. He's the same guy that said Christopher Columbus came and it was all about genocide and everything. Now he's claiming that the Pilgrims, same thing, okay? And when you read all these different sites and they're so woke and they have all this information you've never heard and they seem like they're really, really well informed, they're all just kind of regurgitating what Howard Zinn taught. Now, this isn't history. This is Howard Zinn reading into it and twisting facts and details to kind of fit his narrative, and I'll tell you where it comes from. So how they get that, okay? So, three things. Okay, Indians, it was never about Indians. That was the last narrative. Thanksgiving, our federal holiday, is about God, and now supposedly people are claiming it is about genocide. So there's many Thanksgiving feasts. The one that we usually we remember when the Indians came together was this peaceful thing. It was to celebrate the harvest. That was in 1621. Okay, there was an Indian massacre. That's what it's called now. I don't know that it was a massacre. That's debatable. There was an Indian war. It was actually a war between two Indian tribes, and the Pilgrims were involved because one of those Indian tribes they were allies with. So they got caught up in this war. There was, according to them, a very militant Indian tribe. It killed one of the Pilgrims, and this is much later, by the way. This is 1637. So this is 15, 16 years after the Pilgrims had their first Thanksgiving feast with the Indians. So 16 years later, they're involved in this war with this militant tribe, and they do conquer them. And some people think that they slaughtered them. We don't know, but they did go to war with these people, and when they were done, they did enslave them. The Pilgrims didn't, but they did enslave some of them and sell them. And that was a common practice, and I've talked about that before, and we can get into why they would do that. But basically, this was a common practice of everybody. Back then, slavery was common, and was it okay? Yeah, I think it was okay. So if you're this other Indian tribe, and let's say that there's, I don't know, let's say that there's 3,000 of you, and you have this neighboring Indian tribe, and there's 3,000 of them, and they're going to war, and it's just an epic war, and they're going to wipe each other out, and finally, it's just battling, and all these people getting killed. Finally, you get the other hand of the other people. What do? Okay, you finally won the war. Do you just let them go and say, hey, we got you this time, and you wait for them to come back and slaughter you next time? Or when you get the other hand, what they would usually do is take all the military-age males and they would enslave them. Or if it was not nice and they couldn't enslave them, they had no way of controlling them, they would kill them. Okay, that's what the Indians did. That's what basically everybody did. That's what you had to do. It was practical, right? Or if you were like the benevolence, the Romans did this often, they would just enslave them. Say, okay, we don't want to slaughter everybody. That would be kind of a waste. But what we'll do is we'll enslave them. We'll send them all over the Roman Empire, all over the other parts of the world, so they can never gather back in their culture, and we have to fight the same war over again. And so you could say it was actually an act of mercy instead of slaughtering them, but you couldn't just release them and go to war with them again, a week later. And maybe next time they get the other hand, they slaughter you completely. So that's debatable. But again, that has nothing to do with the first Thanksgiving feast with the Pilgrims and the Indians. It has absolutely nothing to do with our federal holiday. But Howard Zinn wanted to tie that together. He wants people to believe, and they're just perpetuating it now, that really the Thanksgiving feast was a celebration of this massacre of this poor Indian tribe, which again, just totally whitewashes the history. It leaves out the part that the other Indians were warring with each other. It wasn't white on red men. It was actually Indians and Indians, two tribes, and the Pilgrims honor a treaty that they made with the first Indian tribe, and they participated in this war. Likely, we don't know for sure, but likely. But that's what communists do, okay? That's what Howard Zinn, people like him do. Howard Zinn is a Jewish communist. He has no love for Christianity. His book is so anti-Christian that we don't really have a word for that, like a Christophobe. They have a word for anti-Semitism, but there's really no word for, I guess, Christophobia or something. But he's certainly, when you read his stuff, you sense he hates Christianity. He hates Western society. He's extremely biased. Another thing that they're teaching is that the Pilgrims stole from the Indians. That's how they survived. They're just a bunch of bandits and they stole. That's very debatable. The story, according to history, is that they showed up. They find this Indian encampment that's pretty much empty. They don't know if they died off of disease or that's what they think happened, is they probably got smallpox, died off. This is before the Pilgrims arrived. So there's this empty settlement, and the Pilgrims kind of just take that over, and they find stocks or caches of corn, and they use that. And I believe that's what Howard Zinn is referring to as them stealing from the corn from the Indians the first year. And then he talks about this massacre. They're massacring the Indians. Well, it's not quite that. It's a war, and it's not against Indians, a blanket people, like they just want to go out and massacre red people because they thought they were inferior, white supremacy. It's quite the opposite. They're actually allies with the Indians, an Indian tribe, and they go to war with another Indian tribe. And that's 15, 16 years later. Okay, so that's the history of the Thanksgiving, just really short. I wouldn't want to do that right before Thanksgiving. It's really just, for us, it's a time of family and Thanksgiving to God. And so I didn't want to bring the politics into it and all that stuff. But guys, this is important because they're rewriting history, and you have these kids in the school, and it was fun when it was about religious freedom. That was okay. Maybe it was fun when it was about multiculturalism. It was just about getting together with people of different cultures and religions and races and having a joyful dinner. That was fun. But now it's become genocide. And when you start accusing people of genocide, that in my opinion, that's an act of war. That's setting up hatred. And they're doing this on purpose. They're making white Christians, they say it all the time, white Christian males, the enemy through this false history. People are reading this and they're believing it. And either they're saying, well, gosh, we're such a horrible people. We don't have a right to this land. We just surrender. And the people who don't will be seen as enemies and perpetuators of this genocide. So this is what cultural Marxists do. This is what they did in Russia. They would target minority groups and talk about all these atrocities. And this is what they did everywhere they go. And so it's so important your kids know the true history. And the true history is, honestly, if you're talking about the federal holiday, it's just a day of thanksgiving and prayer to God. The whole Indians and Pilgrim things was their attempt to secularize it and turn it into kind of a celebration of multiculturalism, which again, I don't think is necessarily wrong. But again, that's not historically what our holiday is about, Thanksgiving. Okay, now really quick, I got to get to bed soon because I got to get up very early and I have this surgery tomorrow. But I just want to give you just some extra fun facts, but they're not actually fun facts, they're not trivia. They're actually really essential, things that you need to know about the Pilgrims. And I'm just going to go through it really, really quick. But this is important. This is stuff you've probably never heard before. Maybe you've heard it a little bit. The first thing is the historical background. Who are the Pilgrims? Well, the Pilgrims are actually this tiny, tiny little fragment of Puritans. And there's two types of Puritans. There is, and they're both radical, by the way, by the standards of the day. So if you have church history, just put this in perspective. You have one church, that is that becomes the Catholic, which means universal church. So you have one Christian church. I believe it was in like 1090, that's probably Battle of Hastings. Maybe it's 1059, I forget. But there's a schism between the Orthodox and the Roman Catholic. And so you have these two capitals. You have Constantinople and you have Rome as these two capitals of Christendom. They don't actually divorce. It's like a schism. It's like a separation. But Orthodox and Catholic still kind of see themselves as one faith, one church, even though they're in schism. And then in the 1500s, you're going to have the Reformation movement, which was about reforming the Catholic Church, but then it became its own separatist movement. That's in the 1500s, okay? Let's say 1550. So this is the time, okay? So this is with Luther, and Luther kind of breaks away. He starts his own Lutheran church, we'll say Lutheran church. And then from there, you have these other breakoffs. You have the Calvinists, and Luther, man, I think he really hates the Calvinists, okay? And Calvinists would probably be like Baptists today or something like that. So he hates them, but you have the Lutheran branch, you have the Catholic branch, you have the Orthodox branch. Then over in England, King Henry, he gets this idea. He's like, first of all, he persecutes the Protestants in the beginning. He's Catholic, he's very Catholic, but he wants a divorce. King Henry VIII decides that he will become a Protestant, but he's going to subscribe to this interesting brand of Protestantism that says actually that the king of the nation is supposed to be the head of the church, not the Pope. So in many ways, he's going to continue the traditions of the Roman Catholic Church, but basically he's in charge. He's the Pope of the church, and he believes that every king should be their own church's head. So he becomes the head of the Church of England. But it's still a Christian church, still has many of the rites and sacraments of the Catholic Church. So now you have the Puritans, and the Puritans are going to come on the scene. They're going to protest that. They're going to become protester. They now have their own new brand of Christianity. They call them Puritans, I think originally to mock them because they're so pure and righteous, or maybe it's just because they want to purify the religion, but they believe that basically that even the Anglican Church was too Catholic, and it's not Catholic, let's say too Roman. So their belief, and they're closely tied to the Jews, guys, and this is going to set up huge world history, okay? They're closely tied to the Jews, the Puritans, and they believe that they need to Judaize the church again. So this is where you get this Judeo Christian tradition in America, okay? Judeo Christian. So they believe that basically you had Christianity start off as a Jewish religion with all Jews, which is true. Paul and Jesus and all the apostles are Jews. And then basically the Romans, it goes to Rome, and the Romans Romanize the Christian faith. In many ways, they believe that they paganize the Christian faith. And they believe that the Church of England is still doing that. Even though it's headed by a king now, they say that's still not it. We need to get back to the Jewish faith. And so they're actually going to Judaize their own faith. So they're still Christians, but they, for instance, won't practice Christmas because it's not a holiday prescribed in the Bible. They don't celebrate Easter anymore because, again, that's not in the Bible. And they celebrate Thanksgiving because it's the Feast of the Tabernacles. It's a Jewish holiday. And they're going to bring that to America, and that really is going to impact our country huge. And they're going to be part of the American Revolution. The American Revolution is actually not widespread. It's mostly Massachusetts, Puritans really are going to have a strong, Boston area, really that strong Puritan tradition. And they're very anti-king. They're very pro-democracy. They believe that there should be no hierarchy in church, that every local congregation should elect. So you don't have hierarchy, but you elect your church leaders. And they're going to become the first Christian Protestant Zionists. So they're going to be Christians, but rooting for kind of the Jews to return to the land. Instead of Christians having the Holy Land, they want to give it back to the Jews. And they're going to get tied up in the Jewish prophecies as well. It's very interesting. So that's a new thing, by the way. That's a significant thing, Judeo Christianity. So you have the Orthodox tradition, and then you have this Roman Catholic. So they believe that it was Romanized. Then you have this English version with the monarchy at the head, and they're like, no, we want to go back to the Jewish church. And I'm not going to say whether that's right or wrong today or debate it or anything. I'm just going to say that's who they were. So they didn't celebrate Thanksgiving. By the way, it wasn't about religious tolerance. They were so intolerant. I mean, these guys are going to go to the witch trials and stuff. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong either. I'm not commenting. I'm just saying that's who they are. They didn't believe in religious tolerance. They certainly persecuted the Quakers. They certainly believed that their way was the right way, the true religion. And they certainly didn't tolerate other people's religions. Right or wrong. I'm not saying that. So anyway, that just gives you some background, and it's really important to remember too that they come out of the Netherlands, guys. Everything is going to come out of the Netherlands, okay? The Netherlands is the beginning of the new world, I don't want to say order, but it's a world revolutionary movement. The Netherlands breaks off from Spain, and it becomes kind of the home of all of the disenfranchised. So these are Christian, like many Protestants who don't find a home in England because they don't believe that the king is the head of the church either. And so that's going to be like the Puritans, and it's going to be the home of all of these different some of them crazy sects of Protestantism. And then it's going to become, of course, the home of the Jews. It's going to become the home place, the birthplace of what we would call modern capitalism in the Dutch Republic. It's going to become the first republic, but certainly secular republic. And from there, they're going to go topple all of the other kingdoms of the world. So it's a crazy time. The Puritans are certainly a part of that. The Pilgrims are not necessarily. Okay, the Pilgrims, I think that they really just, they had their own vision. They're 120 people, I guess, who came over on the Mayflower. They are Pilgrims. They are separatists. But to give you some idea, okay, while the Pilgrims their vision is to make a new world of pure religion in this new world and create like a new Israel. And they see themselves as like Moses, leading the people across the Red Sea, but it's the Atlantic. And they're leaving Egypt, which is, the pagan of Roman Catholicism and the Anglican Church, the English Church, right? And they're going to start this new Israel in this new world. Like that's their vision. Their buddies, the rest of the Puritan separatists, they're waging a war against the king. King James, this is the guy that kind of we think of him as persecuting the Pilgrims, but actually he's persecuted by the Puritans as well, by the way. They're waging war against him. He's going to die. His son, Charles I, is going to come to the throne, and now he's going to get killed. So the Puritans, you've probably heard of Cromwell. They're going to overthrow this guy. That's who the Puritans are. They're very radical, very militant. They're going to cut their king's head off, and they want a republic in England. And it's basically a changing of the tide. It's a new era of history is really going to start all at this time, exploding onto the scene. So you need to know that. I think that's it, guys. I mean, there's lots of other things we could talk about. The Puritans are very interesting people. I actually respect a lot of what they do. I'm certainly not a Puritan myself, but in some of my writing and stuff, I do have a deep respect for what they believed, their mission, how they came over here, their morality. It's very interesting. You study the Pilgrims and the Puritan faith. Very interesting. So that's all I want to say is just give you kind of like a basic overview of who are the Pilgrims and why do we celebrate Thanksgiving. Continue to celebrate Thanksgiving as a day of thanks and prayer to God. Forget about the Indians. If you want to believe that it was a horrible thing for the Indians, that the white people came over here or something like that, that's fine. It was never about that anyway. That's not what our federal holiday is about. All of those narratives came out of this Marxist revolutionary idea that's been perpetuated in the schools, okay? It really had nothing to do with the Indians, Pilgrims. They did celebrate Thanksgiving. And by the way, they didn't bring the Indians over to thank them. They're friends. And it'd be like me at Christmas saying, hey, I know somebody, why don't you guys come over and celebrate with us? This is a great holiday. We love this holiday. We share it with our friends. Maybe they were even trying to evangelize them, but they were celebrating with them, but not celebrating them. They were celebrating God and just welcoming the Indians to come and join them. So anyway, it is a day of thanksgiving and prayer to God, and that's what your kids need to know, and that's, of course, what we will teach at Blue Manor Academy. All this other stuff, though, is fascinating history, and the Pilgrims are certainly interesting people. I highly recommend, if you want true history, go to the sources. You have Bradford, he wrote his own diary. That's where this history is coming from. Read it for yourself. Don't let Howard Zinn take the same history, because that's all we have. We have the history, right? We have some letters and stuff. Don't let him read his narrative into that and twist it, okay? Don't let the capitalists do that either. They'll say it's really a triumph. The story is a triumph of capitalism over socialism, and there's certainly an element of that if you know the story. But that's writing in your narrative into their history. And there's an element of multiculturalism, religious freedom. I guess you can find all those things, but that's not the true history. So read the true history. Read the proclamations by Washington and Lincoln and Roosevelt. That's what the federal holiday is, literally. So read those proclamations. They're very short. Read them to your kids. And say, notice the Indians and the Pilgrims aren't even mentioned in those. That's so important. That's what we teach at Blue Manor Academy. True history, historical history, the documents. That is what history is. Everything else is a narrative, it's an opinion, it's a perspective, okay? So we want to get back to the true documents. All right, guys, hopefully I'll see you guys next week. My book will be out soon. If you guys have any more quotes, please list them below. We'd love to share them. We'd love to know them. And hopefully you guys are enjoying the book. Let me know how it is. When you guys are ready to write a review, let me know. I'd love to read it. I read all of the reviews. And that book will be out in print, God willing, after the surgery on Monday. We'll see you guys later.